We're on. Perfect. Susie, Carl, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. Susie, you look like you're frozen there.
Yeah, I'm back. Am I back?
You're back.
My internet is struggling at the moment, and I apologize if I go. Carl's got this if I'm not here.
Do not worry. Get that hamster running a bit faster.
Okay, all right, that's enough. Like, we're small, but come on. I mean, you guys still watch EastEnders.
I don't.
You don't say that we're behind the times.
Well, have you got double glazing yet?
Oh, just such a sore point.
Anyway, let's rewind. We've never met, so Susie, Carl, welcome. What I love about PE practitioners and people from our background is you can break down barriers very quickly, I think. And if we never speak again, I apologise. But I hope this is the start of an ongoing conversation. And I guess what I've been trying to do is pull together people that I've seen and heard around the globe that have got valuable perspectives around PE. So Susie, that's why I think it was one of Dale Sidebottom's conferences that you spoke at very passionately about getting the E back into PE. And I've got a webinar going out next Wednesday that I wanted to put some segments of conversation in, and it's ballooned. So I've ended up with way too much content for that hour, but hopefully people will find their way to this whole conversation and listen to all of it. But I mean, to be a bit of an intro, other than doing a PhD in pleasure, which I definitely want to hear about, Susie, do you want to give a little bit of your backstory?
Well, it's a very random subject because you kind of pitch this PhD in pleasure, and like I say, half the people are just super excited by that and real pesty about it, and then the other half are like, well, this is not a thing. You literally, this is not a thing. How does someone say that science? This is what constitutes a PhD. But I think that's the cool thing, is that you can, I mean, a PhD is about new knowledge, right? And not a lot of people focus on pleasure for pleasure's sake, and especially movement pleasure. And we love things that already exist. We love pedagogical models. We love we love stuff that's kind of been around for a long time, but we never really delve into the stuff that we take for granted. So that was the idea around a PhD in movement pleasure.
Yeah, and so am I right in thinking you're teacher first and researcher second? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, pretty much gone from one to the other, so throughout my career. So been a practitioner and always current in the classroom, and still registered now as a teacher, but tried to really progress my knowledge and understanding by going back to university, but then putting that in practice. So a bit of both. I dabble.
Yeah, and did the title start off as something about the joy of movement, and it evolved into pleasure more broadly, or how did that happen?
Yeah, the joy of movement. Well, it's kind of terrible because I think it's a Voltaren ad. So do you have Voltaren, like ibuprofen? Okay, so this is terrible because I thought I claimed it in this academic space, and I was like, joy of movement, no one's done it. And then it was released as kind of take a tablet and you can move again if you're old. So that backfired. I mean, it goes to show that no knowledge is new, really, and people just make it up as they go along. But yeah, it was to do with movement pleasure specifically, and also how that's constructed, because that's heavily constructed and socially constructed in a physical education space.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks, Susie. And then Carl, you're still we call it the chalk face, but there's no chalk even in the classrooms anymore, is there? And I'm assuming
not in my classroom, mate. Not in my classroom, mate. So I'm still a secondary teacher. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I'm an HOD. I've been an HOD for 12 years, so head of department. And I teach at a school that has about 700 kids, and we have a staff of around about 5. So it's a reasonably small school compared to previous schools I've taught at.
What, 5 staff over the whole school? 5 staff in PE, right?
Yeah. 5 staff in PE.
That's enough from you, Will. That's enough from you about the size of New Zealand. Thank you. No more dicks from you tonight.
But so some of my passions throughout the years have been a lot of flip learning and gamification have been my big things. And I probably about 3 years ago, I formed a company and I also run, so it's one of the biggest learning platforms in the country. Wow. And we have about 15,000 students on this platform, which kind of provides targeted video content and quizzes for students in maths, PE and health at the moment. So I come from a position where this whole COVID issue at the moment and this online learning is a real big thing, and it's a space that I've been working in for the last 3 to 5 years. So I'm really familiar with some of the challenges that we face and how we can overcome some of those things.
And I guess also how perhaps some learning can work better in isolation. And obviously we'll touch on in a minute some of the great stuff that we're missing from that. But actually, perhaps all too often we get so busy just being active that we forget to get the educative bit in. And maybe there's the opportunity to do a bit more of that if people are
very, very easy to do in a traditional boys' school.
I can imagine. So I've had some fascinating conversations over the last week, and I can't remember. Well, a couple of people have been referring to the Kiwi PE and health system and saying that the curriculum is good. They're envious of it, if you like. So, Susie, from a policy perspective, what does that look like if people aren't aware? And then, Carl, you can perhaps fill us in on what it really looks like.
I love that because that's often quite true. I mean, we first produced a curriculum in '99, and then we revised it in 2007, and it takes a really long time for cultural change when you have a new curriculum. And I think a lot of people still grapple with the depth of our own curriculum, and I'll leave that to Carl to mention. We have a physical education and health are together in our curriculum, and it's one of 8 learning areas. So our curriculum covers most learning areas, same as other schools: English, the arts, languages, things like that, technologies. So we have all those core subjects. Health and physical education is prioritised as one of those 8 learning areas. So I think that's important from the get-go because not all curricula do that around the world. The other cool thing is that we have this front section of the curriculum, which is all based around a vision and values and key competencies. And those key competencies should be taught throughout. So it doesn't matter what learning area you have. We look at some really juicy stuff around thinking, around participating and contributing, around managing yourself, relating to others, and using language, symbols, and text. I think off the top of my head, I think I've nailed that. It's late. But it's specifically health and physical education. I think the core difference in New Zealand is that, one, we're bicultural. So we have 2 very different sets of knowledge. We have a really Western set of knowledge, and we have that interwoven with this understanding of biculturalism and te ao Māori. And for those that aren't familiar with te ao Māori, Māori is our Indigenous population in New Zealand, and we really value the knowledge that te ao Māori brings. So we're not just physical. So only one of our strands is dedicated around movement, concepts, and motor skills. The other 3 strands that support that are based on relationships, on personal health and physical development. And then we have this other part, which is around healthy communities and environments. So the whole curriculum is structured in a way where we are looking at holistic well-being. We also use a Māori term called hauora, where it's like well-being, and you've got physical, mental and emotional, spiritual, and social well-being components. So that's huge.
And I guess when you mention the Maori culture in, I know that the spiritual element of it is huge for you. Is that where the origins of that come from, or is I guess I'm just intrigued to know that the spiritual bit is the bit that we probably completely neglect in this country.
Yeah. I think people struggle with it because the word itself, spiritual, is often connected with religion, and that's just not what that is in New Zealand. So spiritual wairoa is about, you know, who you are, your identity, your sense of belonging, where you whakapapa back to, so where you relate, making sense of self. And so if you think about movement, like you think about who you are and what you do, that's massive. That is absolutely massive, because that's what keeps you motivated, right? But this is this huge element that's often left out when we think about a physical education program. But it's vital for people to understand why they move.
It's really interesting you say that. When I think from a teacher ed perspective, I think we get scared of the words pedagogy and probably philosophy as well. I think those two words, certainly in my early career, I didn't understand, didn't want to understand. I wanted to just get on with using my vehicles of learning and get on with my sports and my this and my that. And it's only, I guess, when I've had more time to reflect and think deeper about it, that some of that stuff is the underlying values and the purpose stuff starts to really charge and challenge why I do what I do. So yeah, interesting. Okay, Carl, so that's what it's supposed to look like. How does that come to life in your secondary school?
Well, you know, what Susie described there is really our curriculum in a nutshell. And I think when we made those adjustments and those tweaks in 2007, it kind of, using that curriculum just sort of came natural. You have those front end elements of the document that is just, it's almost implied that those things are going to happen. Like, you don't need to intentionally keep revisiting those, because we build them into our teaching practice and we make sure that we're doing them on a daily basis. But as a practitioner, we spend a lot of time on the back end of the document around those strands and those achievement objectives. So as an HOD, when you're building out a curriculum, it's really fun to go through those strands and pull out bits and pieces that, based on the community that you have within your school and your learner and their needs, you can pull out bits and pieces of those from those strands, and you build your curriculum for those year 9s and those year 10s and those senior students from there. And that the great thing about our curriculum is it's so flexible. So I remember when I started teaching, you used to teach a lot of sport, and we would teach sport, and bringing in this new curriculum really transitioned us into a mindset where we would teach context, and sport would just be a vehicle for teaching a context that we pulled out of one of those strands. For relationships, we might be looking at interpersonal skills, and so the core thing that we're teaching there is interpersonal skills, but the context of that might be netball, or it might be rugby, or it might be touch rugby, and we use that context as a vehicle, which makes it really fun for the kids, because they still get those that sporting and that side of things, but we slip in the learning, and it's almost hidden. So it's kind of like sneaky education, where they're still playing the game, but we're instilling these little bits and pieces to build in those concepts and that knowledge. And having that flexibility is really powerful. I've heard of colleagues, who have gone and done tours around the States, and they're just stuck in this really stringent, locked down curriculum where they have to teach this and they have to teach it this way. But, my leadership style is probably down the laissez-faire end of the continuum, where I encourage my staff to come in, and if they have a passion, to run with that passion and use that context and those skills to teach their kids. I'd never say, okay, well, here's term 1, we're teaching this, this, and this, and you have to teach these things. We have the power and the flexibility to change things there.
So the way you lead is more around, what achievement objectives you want perhaps by the end of the key stage or by the end of schooling, and you empower your staff to figure out what's the best vehicle to use to do that.
Yeah, because we all have different learners in our classrooms, and we all have different skills. Every teacher's different, and I have some passions and some strengths in my practice, and I can't assume that my staff or my colleagues are going to be passionate about the same thing. So we have the flexibility to take those things anywhere.
And how did the logistics? So I think we have that freedom in the English national curriculum. It's a page and a half long, and it's very much about a raw purpose and 4 aims. But unfortunately, for a lot of us, we've forgotten that because we've got too caught up in worried about examination PE and all of the syllabus connected with that, and the the appraisal and the performance management that's all wrapped up in that chasing exam results that actually is only for a small proportion of children. But when we're able to take time to think back to the rest of them, we go, actually, we do have the freedom, but unfortunately, when it comes to operationalizing it, logistics get in the way. So it comes down to, how many members of staff, what spaces, and sometimes some of that, what potentially could be very exciting, doesn't end up. And I guess that's why I wanted this conversation, is we've got a moment right now with COVID to go, we've got some time to think about why we do what we do and to make some fundamental changes to it potentially. So yeah, how much does logistics impact on your intention?
I think
that's a good question.
The biggest logistic there that for me that you mentioned is that whole issue around being assessment driven, and that's something that educators all over the country are struggling with and challenged by, this whole idea that we have to assess and assess and assess and assess, and that removes all of that time for discovery and curiosity. It's really hard to push those angles and those contexts with your students when sorry, we've got to assess in a couple of weeks and you don't have these core skills, so we need to teach those, and that's frustrating. Susie sounds like she was chomping at the bit to mention some other things there.
No, not at all. You know me too well. No, I was saying, I think the other thing is the support around that creativity. I mean, it's a real risk if you're going to do something different and get slammed by moderation, for an example. It takes risk for a teacher to step outside of their comfort zone or what they learned in professional practice when they trained as a teacher in ITE. It's a real risk. And a lot of the time they don't have the support as well. So professional, if you look at professional learning development opportunities for teachers, if health and physical education isn't prioritised in that, and there are specific targeted focuses that the government or Ministry of Education wants to see, then it is really difficult for teachers to access quality professional learning development. They have to go looking for that, and it exists, but they have to go looking for it, and it shouldn't be that hard. As a national body, there should be someone that supports that.
And unfortunately, it leads to that widening of, we talk a lot about the disadvantage gap, and at the moment we're very worried about the students that are at home that perhaps are not and working and learning, and hence the widening of that literacy and physical literacy gap. But actually, in terms of teacher practice, it's exactly the same, isn't it? You've got the passionate, the thirsty, the hungry ones that are chomping at the bit to trial digital technologies, flipped learning, cooperative learning, different models-based practice. And then you've got those that perhaps need that the most to lift up the quality of their teaching and their relations with their kids, etc., etc. And they're either too afraid, or they don't know where to look, or they just don't find time to look. And I just think it's a shame that there isn't more of that even opportunity for all. I think in Singapore, it's huge, that whole ongoing professional development, and it's a lot of time and commitment is given to it.
Yeah, I agree. It has to be prioritized, and it has to have the time, and it has to have the money in there. But I think as well, it's understanding that knowledge comes in different forms. I mean, there are wonderful practitioners that have been in the game for 30, 40 years, and they are still doing a really damn good job. And the reason they are is because they're constantly evolving and learning, and they are fabulous practitioners. Now, just because something comes in and it's newly packaged and it's this wonderful new terminology that goes with this newly packaged idea, doesn't mean that it's going to be right for that person or in their context. And I think there's an understanding of that knowledge exists in various forms, and we need to be accepting of that knowledge in various forms and value that knowledge in various forms, not throw the baby out with the bathwater, not be convinced that everything needs to be shiny and new and repackaged, but just really think, like you were saying, Will, it's time to take stock and to think about why are we doing what what we are doing.
You touched a bit in there on the word moderation, and is that a term that's used for how the teachers are assessed and observed by inspectors, or is I'm just wondering what context you use?
Do you want to talk to that, Carl, about your moderation process at school?
We do have we have Aero come in every 3 to 5 years to come and observe you, and they come in with some goals and some targets that they want to look at. That's sort of negotiated with the school, but it's a reasonably positive experience, and you know, you're not there to be told off for the things you're doing wrong. Yeah. So we have that process, and you know, I've been through that process 3 or 4 times now, and if you understand the idea of getting feedback from somebody, and you understand that it's not a negative thing, and you're there to learn, they're there to watch you and see some of the things that the school are doing, and you're there to take some of that feedback, then the whole process is really positive. But for some people that is really challenging, and they see that as people checking up on them, people coming to tell them how to do their job and things like that. And that's a very negative approach, and I think Kiwis do that really well, as they kind of understand, the majority kind of understand what that's all about, and it's about improving our ability to teach and our ability to deliver good outcomes for our students. So my thoughts around moderation is it's a really positive process.
I completely agree. Yeah, we both do some work with Physical Education New Zealand, and we're on the board for Physical Education New Zealand. And at our conference, we always invite NZQA, which are our qualifications framework. And so we invite them in to give us all tips about what are common mistakes around moderation, how can we strengthen.
Time to fill in, Carl.
I froze again. I'm back. I hope I looked like I had my, stuff together when I froze. Just we invite that discussion, I think, around the.
Yeah, so you're eager to learn from NZQA what is...
Yeah, so they come in and give us guidance and support, and we can ask questions and get clarification, and there's this really good relationship going on between the teachers, who are the ones doing the marking and the assessing, and they just take that feedback and they build their capacity there.
And do you feel like that also supports them to build their framework of what they're looking for?
I think so, and there's always that opportunity for a teacher, an educator, or a department to send their own stuff to be looked at by NZQA. And I've heard of schools who have taken really unique approaches to the way they assess their students and do things really, really funky, and send it off for moderators to look at and give them feedback and say, hey, this is really good. Have you thought about doing this? And so I think it can be a two-way relationship there.
Okay, perfect. So here's another biggie, Carl. How as a head of department do you encourage risk-taking amongst your staff? It sounds like we want people to continue to innovate. I was talking to, I don't know if you Dr. Ash Casey, and we were talking about how often when we're teaching, we fall foul of taking risks with the classes that we have in the palm of our hand. They don't need the risk-taking. We need to take our risks with the classes that we haven't got control of, and we don't have them behaving, we don't have them enjoying, but that feels like too much of a risk. How do you do that?
Well, I think what it really comes down to is the relationships in the classroom and the relationships within your department. I mean, that's the core of teaching, is building really safe environments and positive relationships with your students. And when you can create that safe environment, whether that's in your department or within your classes, and the students respect and acknowledge the things that you're doing, and there's that mutual respect there, then you can go out of your way to take risks and fail. And I think in a good classroom in New Zealand, you'll see teachers failing all the time, and the students supporting that and understanding that. I remember when I first started flipping my classes, and I'm not a great speaker. I'm very monotone and boring to listen to. And I remember I'd done like 3 lessons, and I can still remember this kid. His name's Bryn, and he sat at the back and he put his hand up one day and he was like, Condo, because I was at a very liberal school and they called you by nicknames, and he said, Condo, look, we love what you're doing and we can understand and see the value, but man, you got to get more excited when you're speaking on these videos because you're putting us to sleep. And so there's that, when you create an environment like that and kids feel that they can put their hand up and say, hey, you're shit, you need to improve what you're doing to make it enjoyable, then
take some Susie tablets.
Yeah, then you can take risks, and we always in our department, we encourage our staff to take risks, and we know that they've been building really positive relationships, so they are prepared to do that.
Cool. So that segues quite nicely into the next bit I'd like to ask about, because we're all taking risks right now, trying to find a meaningful way to deliver some sort of PE that's P and E, potentially students at home. In England, we're preparing now to start to return students to school from the 1st of June. What's happening for you guys? Are you locked down?
We're great. Have you not heard about our leadership team here in New Zealand?
Very jealous.
I mean, I don't want to rub it in, but I mean, come on. You started with the shirt thing. I feel like I can come back with the fact that we have Jacinda Ardern. Look, no, we've just gone to level 2. So that means for us that we are out of lockdown, so to speak. We can slowly start returning to life, however that might look for us, with a little bit of distancing and some smaller bubbles of humans. So we're not supposed to be in bigger groups than 10, but we have access to most of life. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
And what does that look like for you in school, Carl, in a PE class?
Oh, it's a bit challenging in PE, to be honest. We're probably the learning area hit the most by this. So as well as the standard social distancing, gear and using PE gear is a real challenge. So our students rock up to the gym. They know to wait outside because we have to come in. The teacher comes and lets them in, and then we have 10 at a time in the changing rooms, and they get changed under these X's, and then they come out, and that adds another 10 minutes to your lesson. And then we're doing games that don't involve a lot of physical contact, that doesn't involve a lot of gear, because we know we have to clean it after every lesson. So it's a bit stink at the moment, but that's going to get better. And as we get familiar with what we can and can't do at this level, our instruction and our teaching will get better, I think. And the kids will come to enjoy it a bit more than they might do now. But it is challenging a little bit.
So presumably you're being a bit agile and you're thinking, right, how can we tick off some of the health-based stuff now, because the situation lends itself better to that than other things. And
physical educators are great at that, being resilient and flexible. That's what we do.
Yeah, I feel like in New Zealand, physical educators are often looked upon as those that have the flexibility and the creativity to come up with solutions in schools. And you see this because a lot of physical education staff move into dean's roles or assistant, principal type positions. And it's because, it's the relationships, it's the understanding of this curriculum area that they've trained so well in. And they tend to be these sort of people that just do well in really tough moments like these.
Yeah, well, that's really good to hear. I was talking to Claude yesterday, who is president of the European PEA, and he's based out in Luxembourg, and was saying that the government policy has just been, I think PE is too dangerous, we're going to can it until next academic year. So schools are going back, but phys ed is not happening, and he's devastated by what message that sends. And I get it, it's tough. Later today, the Association for PE, who are our subject association, are doing a briefing on guidance for obviously we've been working with key workers and vulnerable children in schools, and as of 1st of June we'll start to hopefully ramp up the return to school, but trying to think through, well, what are the guidelines, but also what are the pragmatic approaches to not taking all of the, I don't know if you've seen on Twitter this talk about it shouldn't be called social distancing, because the social connection is the really important bit. We need a bit of physical distance, but to allow the connection.
I completely agree with what you're saying, Will, about the messages that are sent. And it's also often people making decisions who don't have experience in the area. And so some physical educators have a really great understanding of how they could do this very well, physically distanced, but that information isn't getting to those making decisions of a blanket nature that are enforced across populations. Now, schools are very different, workplaces are very different. Even classroom-based learning to physical education, like Carl was talking about, there are specific things that are going to apply in those settings. Physical Education New Zealand released a couple of documents around supporting the sector at our different levels, about some ideas, what you can do, how it might look, and again, not having a right or a wrong, but going, hey, we've got your back. These are a few sorts of things you might modify to make this a little bit easier. But it's hard, yeah.
So I promised not to take up too much of your evening, so I feel like we could talk all day, but we'll try and do that on the side of a rugby pitch one day.
Oh no, you're not invited. You're not invited here, Will. No, this is not going to happen.
It's, I think, November the 20th. Is it going to happen?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
we'll see.
All right. I'll put it in the diary.
Yeah, by means of a bit of a wrap up, what I would love to hear is whether either of you have a bit of a hope for the future for PE. So whether it's something that is happening for you and you think it should be happening more globally, or whether it's something you wish you could embed or experiment with more. I think this moment, it's most people have pressed pause, haven't they, and they've had a chance to reflect and regroup. Is there anything that you can think message-wise that is your hope for the future for global PE? There's a big one.
Carl, do you want to go first, Carl?
I'll go first. I think what we're seeing at the moment is the biggest PRD experiment that we've ever had, and I think we've got thousands of teachers who are upskilling in this whole idea of delivering content online, and this is fantastic. And I think if I had to have a hope for something that came out of all of this, is that we could embrace more of this whole idea or concept of a blended learning environment, where, I go back to my roots in flipped learning, and it's about taking the content outside of the classroom so that you can repurpose your classroom time to be more active, be more meaningful, be more engaging for the students. And I think the real sticky point for people trying to jump into a blended environment is this whole idea of what does that consuming content outside of the classroom look like? Well, for the last 8 weeks, Kiwi teachers have done only that, and that's done a lot for their capability to be able to deliver stuff outside of the classroom. What we're not seeing, or what we haven't seen in that lockdown, is what that content creation and consumption outside of the classroom would do for them inside the classroom, and it will do amazing things. You forget about all of the chalking and talking and teaching these key concepts. If you can give them a little taste, a little prior learning before they come in to see you and learn with you, then those lessons become much more engaging, like I've already mentioned. And when you remove some of that content that they need to learn, and you free up an hour, you can do anything, you can achieve anything. You can take that content and that knowledge and go anywhere with that. So I hope that what we can do is we can be more open to this whole idea of a blended environment, and we can leverage some of those things and some of those skills and tools and give our students better learning experiences.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And it's, I think what you're touching on there is that idea of it will give more time for quality time correcting misconceptions and exploring and discovering, rather than giving content, because we all know that computers and AI are going to do content far better than us in the future. So we've got to be more human. We've got to do something with the content.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think, you've absolutely nailed it. I wish you didn't go first there, because I'm kind of grappling here, but I think the key points that I would build on from that is diversity and difference. We love this idea of sameness in our assessments, sameness in our classes, sameness in our pedagogies, sameness in and we conform to this all the time, because we go, oh, so-and-so did it. Oh, this is what Australia do. Oh, this is what the UK do. And we love that shit, and we keep reproducing that because it's like it always was, and it doesn't really need to be that way. So I come back to the fact that difference needs to be prioritized in a movement-based subject. You can't have sameness when you are an embodied learner, and I think that's pivotal. And I think the more we try and make a sameness of a body, of a whole being, the more we fail at getting kids to understand what it means for them, and they just don't take that through the life course. And you know, you can call it whatever you want to. You can call it being physically educated. You can call it being literate. I mean, there's massive discussions and debates around terminology. Terminology aside, none of that's going to matter. There's no research that says the more content you put in a kid or the more physical activity you do as a kid is going to have any impact on how that looks throughout your life course. And so we need to be thinking about this in terms of what is the role and purpose of PE. Are we nailing it? If we're not, if a kid's not leaving and they can't make educated decisions around consuming this movement culture, then we've failed. Like,
and
point
we
blank.
need to own up to that rather than to deflect that blame on policy or on, like I said earlier, logistics, or on trying to own it and go, okay, I can't make it the perfect thing I want it to be, but version 2.1 is going to be way better than where I'm at right now. I'm not going to wait for perfect to change my model. I'm going to incrementally change my model.
Yeah, just try it. I mean, if you're in front of a class of 30, make a change. If you're in a class of 40, if you've got 80, if you've got 100 kids, like you can have so much of an impact on the learners that you have in front of you. And I think we underestimate the power of just being a damn good teacher who learns and is really reflective in practice. Yeah, that's kind of where I'd say I hope that we go to a bit of difference.
Perfect. On that note, I think I'm going to call it a wrap. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much both for your time. Enjoy your Thursday evening.